Have attained the quorum, and I'll call the meeting to order. Thank you very much for coming. As members recall, on the 3rd of March, we started talking about the major areas of study, and then on March the 29th, we had another go at the document, and members still couldn't see eye to eye. We had some amendments. Now, on the afternoon of today, we received some amendments from Mr. Holden Chow, which have been tabled before members. Before we get started, perhaps just a reminder that members remember that we have the terms of reference with 3 planks there. According to the Secretariat, Mr. Holden Chow's amendments, we have to be particularly concerned in 1F in particular. UGL's public statements, authenticity and credibility. It's got nothing to do with the terms of reference. In fact, it has gone beyond the terms of reference. The second issue is in 2C regarding Article 47 of the Basic Law that requires the Chief Executive to make declaration of the assets upon assumption of office. Now, this is not a committee to look at the Basic Law, and we're wondering whether we should look at the original intent of the Basic Law, whether this should fall within the terms of reference. And the third area is the Australian media disclosure of the agreement, whether it is authentic. Now, are we here to look at the UGL agreements, the disclosure of the documents, whether it is authentic and genuine? I mean, this may go against the terms of reference. Perhaps Mr. Holden Chow might think twice about it. We haven't heard from other members. I'm sure Mr. Junis Ho has just come back from Beijing. You might be suffering from jet lag, and perhaps you might wish to state your stance as to whether this is acceptable, and then we move on to the nitty-gritty of the areas of study. Mr. Junis Ho, we haven't touched base with you. Perhaps I'll let you have the floor first. Chairman, after the last meeting, I've had the opportunity to look at all the reference documents, and I've also had the opportunity to look at the Select Committee's reports. Normally, they have the major areas of study, and I'm beginning to be receptive to this idea. And as it was said last time, the proposed major areas of study are there to facilitate members' proceedings. These do not form part of the terms of reference, and I am not too fussed about the wordings, because these are pointing us in the right direction. So I don't have strong objection to that. Now, Mr. Holden Chow has made some amendments, and he has extended the scope a little bit. Now, if this doesn't go against the terms of reference, if this is facilitating us, I think we can allow a little bit more flexibility. So my concerns, in fact, have fallen away, and I'm not too worried about it. All right, then. So the way forward is to adopt the major areas of study as a matter of the wording. So, Mr. Holden Chow, you've been working very, very hard on this. Let's hear from what you have to say, bear in mind the points that I highlighted earlier on. Mr. Chow. Thanks very much, Chairman. I'm grateful to the Secretariat for drafting the proposed major areas of study. After the 2 previous meetings, I have looked into minute detail. I've talked with some of the members here. Now, when we discussed the major areas of study, some expressed concerns as to whether the agreement is authentic. Now, for the handwritten revision, is it genuine, or is it done by Mr. CY Leung himself? Now, members would like to know more about it. Now, after some consideration, I thought that we should entertain members' ideas and have these incorporated into the major areas of study. Now, there are a couple of points that Chairman would like to address. I've added certain things. One F in particular, I'd like to draw members' attention to this. In 2014, UGL published a public statement. Now, we have to ascertain whether it is genuine or credible. I have prepared a copy for members' information. I can distribute this to members. This is rather important. I think we can pass this around to members. And the Chairman also. I've got a copy. Chairman, with your indulgence, I think I can set the scene for members. In 2014, 9th of October, UGL issued a public statement which is before members. Now, UGL refuted some of the rumors. Now, the rumors were that Mr. CY Leung unlawfully received $50 million in return for some service. Now, this is to buy CY Leung's service. Now, UGL issued this statement in no uncertain terms to refute these erroneous allegations from the media. Now, what is noteworthy is that the UGL agreement is intended to make sure that Mr. CY Leung would not poach anybody or would not engage in any competitive behavior. So this is a non-compete, non-poach agreement. After the acquisition, I must point out that in this public statement, it is repeatedly stated that when the agreement was entered into, UGL didn't expect that Mr. Leung would become the chief executive of Hong Kong. Mr. Lam Cheuk-ting, point of order. Chairman, I've been listening to Mr. Chow about the UGL statement. We are talking about the terms of reference of this select committee. Why do you have to go into so minute detail about the authenticity of the statement? Now, this is an area that the select committee has to deal with. Now, you go into such minute detail. I think it has gone beyond the scope of today's meeting. I understand Mr. Lam's concern. Now, we're glad that we have the consensus that we're going to adopt the proposed major areas of study. Mr. Holden Chow is moving these amendments. Now, we have to scrutinize them to see whether they are acceptable or not. So quite inevitably, we have to listen to the justifications advanced by Mr. Chow. So we have to exercise a little bit more forbearance and let Mr. Chow elaborate his point. So please be a little bit more patient. It doesn't necessarily mean to say that we've accepted Mr. Chow's point. We're just listening to his arguments. Can we come to the conclusion? Now, Mr. Chow would like to have more time. I think we can allow Mr. Chow a little bit more time to explain. Mr. Chow, thanks very much, Mr. Lam, for your point. Just allow me some time. This is a statement issued by UGL. Now, there is a serious allegation. UGL has to defend its reputation, so that this is the statement, the seriously worded statement issued by UGL. In the proposed major areas of study, we have to look at this statement as well. A couple of meetings ago, some members made the point that the UGL statement or the handwritten revision, is it genuine or is it authentic? Could there have been any forgery? If we entertain this, if we accept this challenge, I think for this seriously worded UGL statement dated 9th of October 2014, we can include this in the scope of area to ascertain its veracity. And we'd like to find out about the truth. I hope that the chairman would accept this. Right, you have the best of intention. Whether the statement is seriously worded, we have to exercise our judgment. Now, UGL is not part of our investigation, whether it is seriously worded, whether it is genuine. Now, of course, we will look at the UGL statement or the chief executive's own statement or any comments made by other people. We would have an opportunity to look at them if they are considered sufficiently relevant. So I don't think we need to put this UGL statement at such a high position and make it part of the major areas of study. This is my own personal view. I welcome other comments from members. The legal advisor had a word with me. Now, the legal advisor can certainly express his comments. 1F, as proposed, seems to be outside the scope. We'd like to hear from other members before we come to any decision. All right, in the light of what I said, maybe this is outside the scope. Would other members would like to take the floor? Mr. Andrew Wan, Chairman. I think your summary is similar to what I have in mind. Very wise comments, Chairman. I can't see how this is logically related to our scope of study. Now we are putting the cart before the horse. You've got a very good summary, Chairman. I don't think this is appropriate an arrangement. I'm not sure whether this is procedurally correct. I appreciate the efforts put in by Mr. Holden Chow, but the way this is presented, I mean, he's using this to justify his amendments. I find this wholly surprising. I'm not sure whether through Mr. Chow's assistance this document may find itself into our bundle, but this approach would be dangerous.
And our assistants might come up with might see something new online and share with them on the fly. So these have actually been shared ahead of time. Can I speak on Mr. Holden Chow's proposed amendments? Yes. The chairman talked about point A. Is it within our terms of reference? For example, determining the authenticity and credibility. I think this is rather problematic. And under point B, I don't understand why the amendments would be more accurate than the original point under B. Whether Mr. Leung has signed or executed this agreement with UGL, which was disclosed by Australian media, and for the major terms and conditions, these have been taken out. I just find it strange. So what are we actually discussing? For the rest, I do have other comments, but I would talk about them later. Next, Mr. Kenneth Leung. Mr. Holden Chow proposed some amendments. If we are to go into those, we would need another 3 to 4 months at least. Chairman, you also gave your view, so I only have 2 points to make. Under 1F, Mr. Holden Chow talked about the authenticity and credibility of the statement made by UGL in 2014. I think this is not the focus of the investigation, so I object to the proposed 1F. By the same reason, under 3C, in the final paragraph, he talked about the fact that in 2014, the UGL issued a statement pointing out that Mr. Leung did not provide any services or assistance, and the authenticity and credibility of such statement. By the same token, this should not be incorporated into our terms of reference, because UGL is not the main area we need to focus on in this select committee. I believe that the chairman would also find this inappropriate. Mr. Lam Shuk-ting. Chairman, I hope members would refrain from using subjective words when discussing the papers. Otherwise, members of the public who are watching might think that members are biased towards certain views or papers. I appreciate Mr. Chow's efforts in preparing the documents. But I don't see how his amendments would clarify the original lines drafted by the Secretariat. For example, under 1F, I don't quite catch your point. Are you going to discuss all the statements one by one? When we revise the terms of reference drafted by the Secretariat, we should only focus on what is necessary. Or else, if there is no substantial difference, or even, or if you are even complicating the matter, would that be a good thing? Can Mr. Holden Chow explain to us item by item under A, B, and C on why you made those amendments? Before I invite Mr. Chow to speak, let's take in comments from other members who have raised their hands. Dr. Priscilla Leung. Chairman, I think we are beginning to reach some kind of consensus in terms of the areas of study. We have narrowed our differences. The revised edition and the original version both carry 3 main parts. For part 1, I understand the logic behind Mr. Chow's proposed amendments. He is trying to address certain issues. I'd like to clarify some issues from the chairman and secretariat. Kenneth Leung said that 1F should not be discussed. We still have a chance to submit further or recommend certain papers. The Secretariat has provided a bundle containing information obtained from open platforms. And this is something we can consider. For the UGL paper proposed by Mr. Holden Chow, I think it is relevant. But when we later, when we decide on the papers to refer to, we can talk about the rules. We can have more documents. I don't think we can. We need to decide on that now. Some members apparently feel that documents not included now will not be discussed. I don't think this is the case. In the future or in the next stage, when we discuss the list of documents, other relevant papers can still be included. I just want to confirm whether this is true. I agree with Dr. Leung. We are just talking about the areas of study. For the actual list of documents, we will certainly include all relevant documents, so we will not ignore this UGL statement. By the time we, for issues like authenticity, we would decide on that later. Mr. Andrew Wan suggested not to include 1F, but this is not the same as excluding it in the future. At the next stage, we would consider a list of relevant documents, and we might think about the authenticity and credibility of relevant documents, and we might need to ascertain their authenticity. As for Article 47 of the Basic Law and its original intention, I think there is some relevance. In the original drafting, we talked about the declaration system under Article 47. I'm interested in this, and I would like to know more about the original intents of the declaration system under Article 47, and we will have further discussions on that. So I find it all right to include that. As you know, the Basic Law also considers the legislative intent, so I think it's all right to include that. So hopefully we can reach a consensus on that. When we look at the Basic Law, we need to understand the different articles, and if certain provisions are not clear, we have to consider the legislative intents. And we have had a lot of discussions about this since Hong Kong practices common law. So can I invite the legal advisor to offer his views? Thank you. In Article 47 of the Basic Law, in our terms of reference, we discuss whether Mr. CY Leung followed the interest declaration requirements under Article 47 of the Basic Law. So we would look at the declaration mechanism, and we would first look at what the declaration requirements are under Article 49 or 47 before we determine whether those requirements have been followed by Mr. Leung. And whether we need to study the original intents of such articles, I think we can only decide when we proceed to the investigation. If the wording of the article is clear, we might not need to study its intents. For certain provisions, if they are deemed to be unclear, we might look at the original intents to aid with interpretation. But as the chairman said, in future investigation, we might touch upon legislative intents. The issue is whether we need to specifically look at the intents of Article 47 under the major areas of study. For the declaration mechanism of EXCO, we might need to know about them, but this is certainly not the focus of our investigation. Barring any disputes, we might not have to go that far. So there are things we need to do and things we don't. In case of disputes, we might need to look at the intents. So as law practitioners, I'm sure you understand how that works in Hong Kong. Dr. Priscilla Leung, please continue. Under 2C, the idea is to understand more about the legislation, because this is about Article 47 of the Basic Law. In the past, when we talk about legislative intents for China law and common law jurisdictions might be different. When we talk about intents, I think the loading is not very high. So for me, I think we should include the intents of Article 47 in our investigation. I think the legislative intents of the Basic Law is worth looking at as reference material. So when we do our research, it can be included. That's my view. Under Part 3C, again, this is about the statement. I'd like to hear what other members say. When we carry out our investigation, we might study whether services were provided. So this statement might be referred to. So I think we can have a discussion on that. This document and other documents can be included. At this stage, I want to forge a consensus so that we can get started with our work. So I'd like to see what other members say. I think we need to touch upon the intent anyway, so it should be included. For the first and third points, I'd like to hear from other members. Do you really insist on this issue? I'm rather neutral on this. For me, whether we include it or not, we would still touch upon it in future investigation. I think I would clarify this matter on behalf of the Secretariat before the next meeting. We will have a detailed discussion on the list of documents and witnesses, so we still have ample opportunity to talk about this. And the original drafting of the Secretariat was in line with our normal practice, but with the amendments of Mr. Holden Chow, he has been meticulous. But the style or format might be different from the norm of our Secretariat, but I'm not saying who's right or wrong, so that's of reference value to members.
All right, unless you have any further comments, shall we invite Mr. Holden Chow to let us know what bit of the original version is unacceptable. Now, or Dr. Priscilla Leung said either one would be okay. Mr. Holden Chow, would you make a response, please? Chairman, thank you. Thanks very much for the time to clarify the matter. 2C, there was mention of the original intent. I'd like to say why I make such an amendment. Now I'm saying that we should look at BL 47, the original intent of making declaration of the assets, and whether the assets should be declarable. Now we have to determine whether this is asset that should be declared, and we have to find out whether the BL 47 would like to cover that when it was originally drafted. I appreciate having listened to the legal advisor. We're fellow lawyers. I fully appreciate the literal approach. If there are no arguments, we don't have to look at the original intent. Fellow lawyers would understand that. But in this UGL investigation, I like to highlight this to make it easier for members to understand whether this payment received by Mr. CY Leung falls within the scope. Article 47 doesn't mention the assets received before assuming office. Now in 2C, if we do away with the original intent bit, if we say whether the payment falls within the kind of asset that should be declared under BL 47. Now, if there is no argument, then we don't have to look at the original intent. There would be an opportunity for you to do so if there are arguments over the wordings. Mr. Chow, if I may make a suggestion here. All of us here would like to come to a consensus so that we can get on with the task as soon as possible. Now, 1F, I heard Mr. Lam. Now, for 1F, the UGL statement dated the 9th of October 2014, refuting the allegation, if we don't write it in, I would agree with Dr. Priscilla Leung that when we decide on the kind of documents that would form the evidence, then this important UGL statement should be considered. Nobody raised any disputes in this regard. So would you give up on 1F then on this basis? If members accept my argument that we should look at this document when we explore the documents to be included, I am prepared to make some concession there, because after all we like to forge a consensus. Yes, Mr. Alvin Young. Chairman, I'd like to be more practical. For our subsequent investigation, this 1A is assuming that we can only look at the version issued by Australia. I mean, if there are versions from Australia, from South Africa or whatever, we can't look into this. I think whatever sources, we should look at them. Of course, it should include what Mr. Holden Chow said. We should look at the authenticity and the accuracy of the statement. I think that would ensure that we would look at the authenticity and the accuracy of all the statements. So 1A should not be adopted. We should stick with the Secretariat's version. It should be open-ended. I go along with Mr. Alvin Young that the Secretariat's version would be good enough in dealing with this. I agree that there is a specification of the Australian media. unless somebody refuses to provide the documents, I don't think we are coming to that yet. So to say that we have to use the version of agreement published by the Australian media, it would not be good enough. 1F, I think we have a bit of a consensus there. We can do away with 1F, and then we can deal with the original intent of the basic law and also the Australian media published agreement. It would be a totally different thing altogether if members were to adopt the Secretariat's version instead of Mr. Chow's version. Perhaps we allow some time for Mr. Chow to narrow down the differences. Dr. Priscilla Leung. Chairman, I'd like to reiterate that in 2C of Mr. Chow's version, I think it is good. I would support the wordings in 2C if we have the information, more information to assist us, it would be good. I mean, like the original intent of BL 47. Well, that's very clear. Mr. Lam Cheuk Ting. Chairman, I've read through Mr. Holden Chow's revision to the Secretariat's proposed major areas of study. My feeling is that the version has been made complicated, a version which otherwise was very straightforward, and also it has added some content there. Now, like you said, Chairman, should we adopt the Secretariat's version? I think the version itself doesn't have any preconceived ideas. It is objective. It is couched in objective wordings. It is couched in a conventionally worded way. And this is the proposed major areas of study for the Select Committee. Now, if you added all these wordings, I would like to debate with you on all these wordings, like the nature of the agreement. Some said this is a golden handshake. Others, I would say that this is an under-the-table deal. This is not what we like to inquire. We like to look into the content of the agreement and whether Mr. Leung has stood to benefit from the agreement, whether he has made any declaration, whether he has complied with all the requirements for declaration. Why do you make it so complicated? I don't understand, Mr. Chow. All right, perhaps we should. I agree with Mr. Lam Cheuk Ting that the Secretariat's version is very professional and very straightforward and very simple, and they have compiled so many papers in which they use these neutrally worded phrases. Now, Mr. Holden Chow, you are a new member. Now, you have the best of intention to change things, but the Secretariat would try to avoid any political implications, and they would tend to adopt wordings that are neutral. Now, if this falls short of your expectation, then I'm sorry about that. But the Secretariat has always been trying to achieve that. Sorry, Mr. Lam. Chairman, let me get this last point in before I hand the floor to other members. Here in this revision, there is mention of the nature, the background, the original intent, and wordings like that. It makes it sound as if this may not be a good analogy. Is he trying to get people to talk about the original intent, how the basic law was drafted? Is he trying to have the basic law interpreted or whatever? Now 3A, for instance, in the UGL agreement, is it effective? Now he added the phrases partly or wholly effective. Now when we conduct the investigation, we would know whether it is wholly or partly effective. Now this is really like gilding the lily, Mr. Chow, if I may say so. He is making things unnecessarily complicated. This is the third time we are debating on this. Now, after this revision, maybe we will come back again next time to look at the revisions again. It will be hard for us to get started with our work. People will come away with the perception that we are trying to delay the proceedings. For select committees, this is not our convention. The major areas of study arising from the terms of reference, we don't normally spend so much time debating it. Mr. Andrew Wan, Chairman, I tried to make it brief, and Mr. Lam has mentioned some of the points that I made. Now, let's not impute into members' motives. Just looking at the logical thinking, if you add so many variables and qualifiers, the more you do so, the harder it would be for us to look at the truth. Because we have to fulfill all these unnecessary conditions. Like Mr. Lam said, to determine the authenticity, the credibility, I think this is really unnecessary. I don't think we would be exercising our judgment on the basis of wrong or fake documents. If we spend so much time getting mired on debate over the authenticity of the document, you can imagine how the meeting is going to be panning out. I don't want to surmise the motive. Now, Mr. Chow has been working so hard. There are many reasons motivating his industriousness. Now, some said that the Pandams are engaging in filibustering. I think this shows that technically one can turn simple matters into technical matters. Now, to cite an example, that is for you to judge Chairman 2C, that we are here to look at the original intent of BL 47 regarding the Chief Executive's obligation to declare asset. I would have thought that we are here in an NPC SC meeting. That is not an area of concern to us. I don't think we would be having the power to be concerned about this. And we may be going round and round in circle over this matter, and people will be expressing their own views, and in the coming 6 months, the meeting will be conducted in this way. I hope that you will exercise your judgment in this way.
Members have given their views, and myself and the legal advisor have said that Hong Kong practices common law, and Mr. Ho Dun Chau accepts our view. So when the time is right, we will decide how to go forward. Mr. Kenneth Leung, I don't want to speculate on the motive of Mr. Ho Dun Chau or his intents. He is a lawyer, so he has tried to turn this document virtually into a legal document in order to facilitate the work of the committee. I pledge Mr. Ho Dun Chau to compare the differences between the Secretariat's version and his own amendments. Can he point out which of his amendments are absolutely crucial. You made about 10 amendments. Can Mr. Chow spare some time to point out which of those amendments are crucial? I think this is in the best interest of the committee. I hope that we can come up with a direction and major areas of study. Thank you very much. Mr. Wong asked for a judgment from me. I try to refrain from that, and that hopefully members can narrow their differences. Mr. Wong and Mr. Kenneth Leung requested Mr. Holden Chow to explain which of his amendments are essential. If there are none, we might stick with the original version. Before you speak, well, Dr. Junius Ho would like to speak. Chairman, I also had concerns about a very lengthy document, but we already have terms of reference. I think we're not looking at terms of reference, but guidelines. I think I don't worry too much about the quality of the drafting. I think what Holden wanted to express, whether what he said falls within the original terms of reference. He wanted to look at the nature of the agreement and the terms and conditions. If we study UGL, we must appreciate the gist of the agreement. So we will certainly look at the nature of the agreement. So I do not find those amendments problematic. The drafting is one issue, but the intention is to elaborate more on the agreement. So I don't see any conflicts in 1A. For 1B, whether Mr. Leung signed or executed this agreement with AGL disclosed by Australian media, and if so, whether Mr. Leung has been elected chief executive on the date of signing. I think this is about the same issue on whether he was already in office when the agreement was signed. So I do not see any conflicts. As for the response to media speculation produced by Mr. Chow, and it was item 34 in our reference documents. And on the authenticity or credibility of this 2014 agreement, I think it's natural to look at the authenticity of these papers. I certainly do not think that we are being sidetracked. I don't want to go into the legal tests. I think that there's no harm in covering them. Under 2C, we are looking at the scope of application of BL 47. Is it about assets or contingent interests? I don't really know. I don't think looking at the intents of BL 47 is too far-fetched. There's no harm including it because it's not part of our terms of reference and it's not beyond our terms of reference. I don't think Mr. Holden Chow is extraneous or otherwise. Apparently, after returning from Beijing, Dr. Ho's view has changed. Before, he wanted to stick to the three pillars of the terms under the terms of reference, and he did not to extend upon that. Now, Dr. Ho, well, what Mr. Holden Chow suggested is an extension of the original TOR. I hope I'm not offending anyone. this is not an extension of the TOR, and there would not be any impacts. This is just to facilitate our work. If this is an extension of the TOR, then I don't think it would be acceptable. But I do think that this is not an extension of the TOR, and this would not affect our work. Legal advisor, thank you. I have two main points to make. First of all, the agreement disclosed by Australian media in Mr. Holden Child's Amendment 1A, 1B, and 1E, it has been mentioned. In terms of the authenticity of the agreement disclosed by Australian media, at this point, this should not be the way we should go. And at the next stage, we would identify witnesses. We would obtain a copy of the proper agreement signed between UGL and Mr. Leung. As for the authenticity of the agreement disclosed by Australian media, at this stage, it is not really relevant. Members also talked about 1F and 3C. The authenticity and credibility of the 2014 statement was mentioned, and this is an area of more concern because the authenticity of the statement should not be within our scope of study. Even after the investigation, we would not determine or judge whether this statement is genuine. This is not within our scope of investigation. And members might be interested in this over the course of investigation. And through summoning witnesses or other items, members can come up with their own conclusion. But at this stage, there's no need to judge the authenticity of this document. This is the 9th year I'm in LegCo, and I used to make a number of mistakes because I did not accept a lot of some recommendations from legal advisors. But I do appreciate their neutrality and professionalism. So I hope that while members might want to insist on their views, we should be more objective in considering the views of legal advisors, and this would benefit us all. Mr. Yang, Chairman, I completely agree with the legal advisor, so I do not wish to dwell on that any further. Ms. Holden Chow, I would allow you to speak, but I hope you have heard members' views. Can you focus on the amendments you think are absolutely crucial? After the discussions, I still feel that the Secretariat's version is neutral, pragmatic, and simple. There is lack speculation, and it does not carry a lot of irrelevant items. Chairman, I do respect the views of fellow members. Can you give me 10 minutes to discuss with members on which items I would insist on and which I would give up? Can you give me 10 minutes? All right, so we can take a 10-minute break. Thank you.
10分鐘你飲杯